Good evening, everyone. And for tonight's History Happy Hour, we have with us Garry Adelman. He is a graduate of Michigan State University and Shippensburg University of Pennsylvania. Garry Adelman is an award-winning author, co-author, and editor of 20 books and 50 Civil War articles. He is the vice president of the Center for Civil War Photography and has been a licensed battlefield guide at Gettysburg for 26 years. He has conceived and drafted the text for wayside exhibits at 10 battlefields, given thousands of battlefield tours, and more than 70 Revolutionary and Civil War sites. And he has delivered lectures at hundreds of locations across the country and on television. He works as the full-time chief historian at the American Battlefield Trust. So the American Civil War Museum is pleased to be doing this program in partnership with the Trust. And with that, I will turn it over to Garry Adelman.
Let's see, there we go. In the Civil War, no joke, literally, as my friend Bob Zutter likes to say, the rebels shot first. They both shot first at Fort Sumter, but they also had lots of photographers out there, such as this incredible 1860 picture at Fort Moultrie. Fort Sumter can be seen off to the right in the distant background. You see the United States flag at Fort Moultrie. You can see the nice hedges and the hotshot furnace is all well decorated. And the photographer came back several months later after the war had started, and you see a much different situation. Sandbags. You see one of the cannons turned directly toward Fort Sumter in the distance. You see all the shrubbery is gone. And I know some Monty Python people are probably thinking about which shrubbery I mean there. Look, I see Kelly smiling right off the bat. So Southern photographers were busy in what we call the West early and before the war, showing, seemingly ragtag armies coming together on the streets of Charleston, along James Island, and elsewhere. But after the Civil War started, Southern photographers were the first ones to show what the war looked like. They recorded photos within one day of when the Union evacuated Fort Sumter. And here it is, one of the first photos of the entire Civil War. Look at the Confederate flag flying above Fort Sumter there. So just an incredible view, probably recorded by Alma Pelot, working for a guy named Jesse Bowles. And they recorded an extensive series, and other Charleston photographers came out there and recorded panoramic images. This is taken within days of when Fort Sumter surrendered to Confederates. So these are the earliest Civil War photos we have. We have other Southern photographers busy. This is a guy named George Cook getting several pictures inside Castle Pinckney, also in Charleston Harbor. I might come back to these a little bit later. And you see another firm you don't know as well, but recorded incredible pictures. This Osborne Durbeck. This is a close, tight-in view showing their mobile darkroom. It has a white linen cloth over it saying exactly where they're located. One of at least 7 photographers located on King Street in Charleston. And it says their address and everything. In the Western Theater, you have some of the only photos known that show anything resembling combat in the Civil War. These are ironclads in Charleston Harbor, recorded in September of 1863 from Fort Sumter. This is a blow-up of an original glass plate in the collections of the Valentine Museum, and you can see the battle smoke coming off of the ironclad warship on the right and a couple of monitors nearby. So this wasn't easy, especially as the war went on. It was very expensive and difficult to take fragile glass plates out to battlefields and soon to be historic sites in contraptions like this. A what's it wagon, a what is it wagon. You lived in and around the wagon. You had to take everything with you needed for your big sort of expedition. And here we have a photographic assistant actually holding the most common type of glass plate used in the Civil War. I said glass plate. This is the wet plate process. So this is a 4x10-inch negative shot with a twin lens camera. In other words, it's going to make 2 images to make a 3D image here. And I think you all know what I'm talking about probably. So you see that glass plate there. If you take that glass plate and you run it out to your camera after it's been exposed to a light sensitive material, you run it out to the camera that's been preset there in a light proof box, put it in, take the shutter off for 4, 5, 6 seconds, something like that, depends on the sun. And you're going to end up with an image on there. Okay. And that is a wet plate, glass plate negative there. Okay. You can see there's 2 images one next to the other, if you take that image and you put a black background on it, it becomes a positive. And that's what we call an ambrotype. You could buy things like this in cases, and there would only be one of them. However, what you could also do is take that glass plate negative, this one taken at Vicksburg, and then put it against some light sensitive paper in the sun, and you could make another one and another one and another one. And one glass plate negative could produce thousands of prints. And of course, that's why photography flourished during the American Civil War, this wet plate process. You could get portraits, you could get these stereo views made. Most of you have seen these, of course, in your own collections or in your parents' or grandparents' parlors, where you put it inside something and people could travel the world and travel our battlefields, looking at them in 3D without even leaving their houses. It was the Netflix of its day, you could say. So all of these pictures, not all of them, but most of the photos I'm showing, including the one you see on the left that I just showed, are available for free in high resolution downloads at the Library of Congress. Okay, loc.gov. If you're not into that yet, you like Civil War photos, and even if you do, you're going to find some stuff you hadn't seen before and some things within those photos you hadn't noticed before. So I use it all the time. There are other institutions that have them as well. In any case, I mentioned that these negatives were 4 by 10 inches. Most of us, at least here, from what I could tell of the people I could see, grew up with 35 millimeter negatives. They're about 1¼ inch by 1 inch here. And these are 10 to 25 times larger, depending on how you count it, okay? Also, everybody knows that those 35 millimeter negatives had grain on them. These did not have grain. They did not have pixelation. It is a chemical sheet, so that when you put it on there, you could record an image that is just absolutely rich in information. Here is one recorded of a contraband or a John Henry soldier at Brandy Station, okay? I estimate that the camera's about 15 feet away from him. And if you zoom in on this glass plate negative, man, you could see every crack on his hand. If his palms were up, you'd be able to see his fingerprints. So I'm sure on here there's someone that thinks they have a good digital camera. I challenge you to try to see cracks in hands this well from 15 feet away. Can you see people's fingerprints from 15 feet away? Indeed, the best digital 4x5 cameras are just approaching the resolution they achieved during the Civil War. Now, heading out toward the west here, when people start thinking about the Western theater, and we'll talk about what that actually is as we go along, people often talk about the Battle of Wilson's Creek. You're talking, oh, it looks like I see a mistake on there too. August 10th, 1861, twin Confederate victories at Manassas and at Wilson's Creek. And what you see is the South really coming on strong east and west here. That's not going to last. We don't have any early pictures of Wilson's Creek. This is taken and provided to me by the park in, I think, the 1920s here. But man, I'm sure many of you have been to Wilson's Creek. What a great battlefield. It looks very much just like that. I tried to sort of form a panorama out there. And what you'll see is that Wilson's Creek is not unique. I wish it was, but most Western battlefields, we don't have a single wartime photograph of them. There are some notable exceptions, but most places in the West just aren't that well photographed. Indeed, we'd be lucky if a third of the battlefields in the East even have a wartime photo taken there. Of course, the West really starts getting attention after General Ulysses S. Grant, and naval forces capture Fort Henry, capture Fort Donelson, as you see here. And of course, what that results in is the opening up of Tennessee. All of a sudden, the Union can go all the way down into Mississippi, practically unfettered. And suddenly the Union, with a few victories, is going to control tens of thousands of square miles of territory, Confederate territory. It's a massive Confederate collapse at that point. Nonetheless, photographers really didn't go out and record these battlefields. You can see Grant's line of advance. I think you know what happens. He's going to advance toward Shiloh and camp there. Confederates will lash out at him, but Grant will come roaring back and win the battle. And I'm showing you one of 3 known wartime photos at Shiloh. 3. Okay. And if we go around to these places, we're lucky to have 20 some from the war at Vicksburg because most battlefields don't have them at all. By the way, of the 3, 2 are almost identical. They look exactly like this. Now, why is this? Primarily is because if you look at all the Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Maryland battlefields, that's them up on the upper right there. Oh, I'm up at Gettysburg. I have a couple of days to spare. Let me head down to Richmond and I'll hit, Fredericksburg and Brandy Station and all these battlefields on the way. While I'm at it, let me go out to Trevilian Station and let me go on to the Virginia Peninsula because I have time. Let me just hit all these places. In the West, it's a little bit different. Oh, I'm up at Pea Ridge, Arkansas. Do you have 2 months to spare? Yeah, let me go and run the blockade and make it over to Savannah and record a couple of pictures. The distances alone prohibited people taking these pictures. And when they did, it was hardly ever profitable. I'm looking here at the Nashville area where there's plenty of pictures, but at Stones River, we have about 3 or 4 wartime pictures. At Franklin, next to it, we have none from the war. We don't have anything until the 1870s. So there were fewer photographers there, and the distances made it completely unprofitable in order to do this. And photographers are mostly businessmen, and even if they weren't, they needed to pay for their expeditions somehow. Now, by the way, I just referenced something. I showed all the eastern locations in this one tiny spot. And unfortunately, for people in the West, this is how we think about it, right? Here's the East. We've got parts of West Virginia, but mostly part of Virginia, Pennsylvania, a part of Pennsylvania and Maryland, and that's the East. And then everything else somehow is the West. And that allows me to talk about a lot of photographs taken in the West. Unfortunately, for people in the West, it's really not the West. It's actually just there's the East, and then there's sort of not the East. And man, this has been driving people crazy since the Civil War. If you go to Chickamauga, Shiloh, and whatnot now, they're waving their arms saying, hey, this is important. And I agree, Civil War is won in the West. But even during the Civil War, I mean, Western armies can capture 100,000 square miles of territory. And then all of a sudden, McClellan loses one battle. Oh my God, protect Washington. Lincoln couldn't believe this effect, and it's still happening to this day. Now, as bad as people in the West have it, I mean, imagine that the West ends here at the Mississippi River. You've got something else even further. Oh my God, the poor Trans-Mississippi. We don't even talk about that like it's a real theater a lot of the times. And it is very limited in terms of photography. The most famous places of the Civil War, they are often Union victories where Union photographers, Northern photographers, would be able to access those battlefields and then place them in their newspapers and then visit those places and preserve battlefields and put up monuments and things like that. So photography is one of the key components that can help make a place famous. Now, this is not to say that Southern photographers weren't active early in the war. Like I said, they fired some of the first photographic shots of the Civil War. And early on, you have some photographers, a guy named Edwards and otherwise, recording Confederates in the field. Check this out. These are Mississippi soldiers at Pensacola, Florida. There's an extensive 1861 series recorded there. In the meantime, you have somewhat clearer glass plate photos, better chemistry, a little more experience taking place in the East. So you can see, camps look a little different. Some of the Union ones look a little tidier. But eventually the Southern chemicals are just going to dry up. The blockade works. They're not going to have access to the chemicals. And when they could get photographic supplies, they're going to use them to make portraits because that's how they made money. Okay, so in other words, sometimes people accuse me on my Garry's Civil War page of only showing Union photographs or too many more of them. That's because 90% of the photos were taken by Northern photographers. And unless the Union won, they couldn't access those battlefields till after the war. So there's a reason why there's so many more Union subjects recorded photographically during the Civil War. Now, getting back to around Tennessee and Mississippi, this is a sketch showing the Battle of Corinth or the area around Corinth. Remember, the Union advances after Shiloh. The Confederates put up a show of force at Corinth, but in a very slow siege movement, Henry Halleck and U.S. Grant along for the ride, go and start to move toward Corinth. Corinth is very important, namely because of the railroad crossing that you can see there at the right. You can also see the Tishomingo Hotel right next to it. And you can see some of the stores being burned as the Confederates are actually evacuating because they could not fight off the Union horde at that point. So the Union controls 2 railroads at this point. And then the Union's going to stay for a while and photographers set up camp there. So they're going to get recorded pictures of the Tishomingo Hotel. They're going to get pictures looking out toward where a battle is going to be taking place at Batteries Williams and Battery Robinette, you've probably heard about. By the way, the railroad crossing is just beyond this platform, and you can see another railroad over here. There are other photos taken of the camps beyond along sort of a supply, I was going to call it a wharf, but some sort of a supply station right here. What most people don't know is that all those photos go together. Yes, they were recording panoramas during the Civil War. I mean, the photography was so far ahead of what a lot of people ever thought. The good thing is that if you're careful and have permission, you can go to the same place today. There is this train station at the exact location of the Tishomingo Hotel. The railroad crossing is right there. And those same forts, one of which is sort of reconstructed in not quite the right place by the Park Service, is Battery Robinette out there. So you can really step into a Civil War photo sometimes when you can go to the exact same place. And railroad tracks are a great way to do that. Roads move a lot. Railroads move a lot less. They like to go straight. They don't tend to reroute those unless there's a new bridge or something like that. And as I showed you, the photographers recorded this sort of supply area here. They also recorded groups of photos standing in front of this same supply area. There are photographic firms hanging out there ready to record your company. And you know what? You record these 30 guys, maybe 12 of them will buy that photo from you. Pretty cool, especially when there's nothing going on and you're just garrisoned there. Here's one of the photographers there, Armistead and White. Man, I wish I could blow this up more. Look, they have examples of their work above these guys. And off to the right, you can see some of their larger plate images that they're selling there. Look, they have more sort of cases and portrait cases over there. You can see their skylight over here that they can open up as needed to provide more light inside the gallery there. So efficient operations. These guys sometimes came into town and stayed for a week. Sometimes they made permanent operations there. In any case, like I said, there is going to be a terrible battle there. See, the Union took Corinth. The Confederates came back several months later. In October of 1862, Earl Van Dorn is going to try to capture Corinth. It's an important spot. They want to get it back from William Stark Rosecrans. Rosecrans was ready, though. He had made good dispositions. And although the Confederates got in street fighting, broke some Union lines, there is an intense fight here at Battery Robinette and at a couple other places, and the Union is going to hold Corinth. Of course, I think you know that of all the photos taken of dead soldiers in the Civil War, all of them are taken in the East, and it only happens on 8 occasions during the entire Civil War, except there is one place of the entire Civil War in the West where dead soldiers are known to be recorded on battlefields. There are 104 of these, by the way. We figure exactly 104 photos of dead soldiers, human carnage on battlefields. I'm not trying to sensationalize this, but because they're so rare, and sometimes, unfortunately, these are the best views we have at Confederate uniforms at a certain point during the war. So we use these, at least people like me do. So you see Battery Robinette in the background, and you see some of the human carnage here. And this is one of 4 pictures actually taken. I'm sorry, 3 pictures taken here outside Robinette. Now you could see the same photo. They would clean it up a little bit and make sort of a nicer hand tinted version of it that they could sell. You can even see when you zoom in that it doesn't look as real as the first one I showed. They're glossing over it to make it look a little bit more real. These are also the only photos of the entire Civil War where you see dead gathered for burial, and one of them is identified. This is Colonel Rogers of the 2nd Texas, actually, and he was identified in the earliest versions of this. Now, just coming to light on the cover of the Center for Civil War Photography's Battlefield Photographer is a brand new, or heretofore unknown to us, photo of dead soldiers in the field. We don't know exactly where it is. It screams Corinth to any of us who really look at it. It's got the similar time of year. It's got a gritty look. It's got the stumps like the other shots have. And the fighting is extensive at Corinth. So we figure this new incredible photo in a private collection, but I was able to secure this from the auction site before before it was sold. An incredible thing. And there's still work to be done on it. Another photographic mystery of the Civil War. So in the meantime, this is late 1862. The Confederates really, need to be working on a whole lot of things. They are going to try to take back the initiative. They're going to move north all the way into Kentucky. That will result in several battles. Richmond, Munfordville, both of those are going to go well for the Confederates, but not so much at the Battle of Perryville, where they came so close, but the Union just sends the last bits of reinforcements in, stops the Confederate advance, and the Southerners under Bragg will, do a huge retreat back all the way back down into Tennessee. Not long after that, there will be one of the most terrible battles fought in the Western Theater, the Battle of Stones River, more costly than Shiloh or the Battle of Antietam. And another Bragg sort of semi-victory, made some gains, but the Union hangs on and Bragg leads at that point. And it doesn't seem like anyone really looks at it, really blames Bragg for leaving Perryville. His chance was up. He had no more to gain by being there. And Stones River seems to be that. Go ahead and criticize Bragg for a lot of other things, but there's no reason to stay where you have no reason to stay. Ask John Bell Hood in December of 1864 at the Battle of Nashville. In the meantime, you have other photographers recording views. There's 50 photos recorded at Camp Nelson, one of the newest national parks, if not the newest in the country. A great, cool facility that was first used for soldiers. And then it was a huge African-American sort of a contraband area. And it was a huge staging area. And their interpretation there is very good. I recommend it. And the photographers did make their way down to Stones River to secure photos of one of the first monuments ever erected during the Civil War. Depends what you count a monument. This is maybe the earliest one still standing. I think erected in 1865, if I'm correct. It says Shiloh on it, but they're mentioning a lot of things. But this is at Stones River. Let me show you. It's right there. I was there a few weeks ago in the background, and it's at the edge of the battlefield, but more of Stones River is being preserved, so that's good. They took photos inside the enclosure. This is at Hell's Half Acre. That's the round forest in the distance there. And this is where some of the soldiers are buried as well. You can see it in the old photo and in the new photo there. Now, of course, we're into 1863 now, which means a lot of things are going on and whatnot. I see that Cassie went to Stones River for the anniversary. I missed it by just a few weeks, so I'm sorry I did. And I think you know what's going to go on in this Vicksburg campaign this whole time during the Battle of Perryville, during the Battle of Corinth, during Stones River. Grant is trying everything in the world to try to get to Vicksburg. Ultimately, as you know, he's going to run the gunboats past Vicksburg. He is going to eventually cross his men at Bruinsburg, win a battle at Port Gibson, and then surprise everybody and move on toward Jackson, capture Jackson before turning the other way. And then, of course, the most terrible battle of the campaign, Champion Hill, and then Big Black, where we do have a couple of photos. And then it's going to go on toward the battles and siege of Vicksburg. Vicksburg is one of those places where we can claim some photographs. This is, as you know, the Shirley House and some of the Illinois soldiers' sort of dugouts on that hillside. That's a very steep hillside, by the way, but I still see undulations in the ground when I go. It's woods now. It's very steep and hard to access, but it's a really interesting site. Note how you can actually see the fortifications going right up into the house. The house is part of the fortification. It goes right up to it, at least. We have photos downtown at Vicksburg. Again, these photos taken after the Confederates surrendered there, after the Union is going to occupy the place for a long period of time. We even have photos from the top of the courthouse. Great museum there, by the way. And only there do you see the mini ball pregnancy exhibit there. I'll leave that for if you ever go there, but I've been able to gain access to the top twice. And once I was able to recreate this photo. Now, you got to know that the course of the river has changed. Most of you go to Vicksburg realize that. And you can get a somewhat similar view actually from the top of the courthouse there. It is my goal to go to as many Civil War heights as possible. I've been at the top of the Capitol, the Smithsonian Castle. Anybody has connections there. I'm still trying to get to the top of that one. The most photographed place in the Western Theater, you'd never expect it. Port Hudson, Louisiana. A firm named McPherson and Oliver went there and recorded 200, maybe 340 different pictures during and after the siege there. And there's a lot of good photographic work that can be done there. It's also a great site if you are ever able to go, but you have to want to go there. And I see that Uli went to Vicksburg as well. Just great to do the whole campaign. And I think you've got to do Port Hudson along with it. I mean, people always say the Mississippi, fell right after Vicksburg, which is true. The Union effectively controlled it. But until Port Hudson surrendered a few days later, it really wasn't fully. The waters did not go unvexed to the sea until Port Hudson actually fell. Now, we have great gritty photos of Union batteries, of Confederate emplacements after they evacuated and whatnot. A great series. I encourage you to go to Library of Congress, type in Port Hudson, and you'll see dozens of great gritty photos there. And that's not as far away as they got. This is Brownsville, Texas, during the Civil War. We have photos at San Francisco Bay, out in the Alcatraz Island area. So, I mean, you talk about the West and the Trans-Mississippi, man, we're lucky to have anything out there. And actually, some of the photos taken near Alcatraz were actually censored. One of only, I think, 3 sets of photos censored during the Civil War by the War Department, as a matter of fact. So we don't have all that many. So this is, again, Grant is going there, and Vicksburg will capitulate in July of 1863. This is a confusing map, but I think you know what is happening here. After the Battle of Stones River, eventually William Stark Rosecrans will start to move in the Tullahoma campaign, a brilliant series of maneuvers that forces Bragg not only back to Chattanooga, but then beyond Chattanooga and into Georgia. Bragg keeps retreating until the Union put themselves in a vulnerable position, and that will result in the Battle of Chickamauga. As you well know, Bragg gets his largest force. He actually has as many troops as the Union soldiers, and it is the second bloodiest battle of the Civil War, the largest one of the West. And of course, he'll win a big victory, call it a Pyrrhic victory maybe, because the Union only goes back to Chattanooga, occupies strong entrenchments, and Bragg lays a siege that isn't even a siege. At that point, the Union grows stronger, sending numerous divisions to there, and that will result in the battles at Chattanooga, of course. And I think you know that we don't have too many photos taken at Chickamauga. Here's the most famous one by far, taken at Lee and Gordon's Mills. We have 2 photos actually taken there. The mill, you can see the shape is a little bit different. It's a rebuilt structure, but it's cool. You can buy jam and cornmeal and stuff there. This is on an American Battlefield Trust tour, I think in 2011. Here's another photo taken of the mill from the other direction. A lot of what we have at Chickamauga is sort of gritty like this, but luckily people like Alfred or William Wad are going to go ahead and clean these up and show us some of the most beautiful sort of watercolors and sketches of the Civil War. This is among the more famous images of the Battle of Chickamauga as well. But like I mentioned, they're going to next hit they're next going to hit Chattanooga. And I'm sorry, I keep looking at questions and it's hard for me to not answer them. So I'm at a good break. I said that some of the photos in San Francisco were censored. That's because they showed Union prison areas and they were afraid the Confederates would see them and learn how to break their prisoners out. The other ones, Abraham Lincoln in death, and the John Wilkes Booth autopsy photo. Those are the ones at least that come to mind. We've seen the other 2. We have not seen the John Wilkes Booth autopsy. I don't know if we ever will, but we know it was made. Was the plate destroyed? Were the only prints destroyed? Who knows? So actually, thanks for your question. So this is Chattanooga here, one of the more well-photographed places in the Western Theater. Give me Port Hudson, Chattanooga, and Charleston probably as the most photographed places in the West. Nashville running behind those. But beautiful spots. And you can see here what I believe is called the Crutchfield Hotel. And I'm going to ask you to focus in on some of these sort of subtleties in the distance. These just have to be temporary structures. You can see sort of Scott, I think it's Keene there and company, and the Dunlop, the striped building there. We have other photos that actually show, I missed, that says Crutchfield House right there. So I guess I guessed right. That you can see these same 2 places. Here's Scott Keene, and there's that striped place over there. But check this out. Here is, I think the Crutchfield House was torn down during the war, and here's its foundation for the new one. It looks like being staked out. And to this day, this is where the Sheridan Hotel now sits there. So it looks a lot different, but you can still line up some of these old photos, even in Chattanooga. I think you know there are 3 days in the Battle of Chattanooga, late November 1863. The Union captures Orchard Knob. They capture Lookout Mountain. They are eventually going to get Missionary Ridge as well. It's an astounding victory for the Union, even if part of it happened by accident. And we do have photographs there, here on the Craven House Plateau, here looking up toward not only the Craven House, but up toward the Palisades at Lookout Mountain proper. You talk about an impregnable position. But unfortunately for the Confederates, you can capture that position without even capturing it. You can go below it on this plateau and render any enemy up there completely isolated and surrounded. And that's what the Union did there. You can actually see they eventually rebuilt the Craven House. You can see there was a huge hotel right on top of Lookout Mountain for a while. This is the view from Orchard Knob, actually looking toward Missionary Ridge. What a beautiful and incredible thing that we get to see in 1864, 1866, looking right from this area out toward Missionary Ridge. You can see exactly what the Union soldiers moving toward that in that direction actually saw. Here's a photo showing the approximate place today. I'm going to go back once to show you this pit here. Well, the breastworks are still there, as is Missionary Ridge in the background with, 1,000 houses, unfortunately, in between them. Here's a photo taken of some of the rugged mountains that William T. Sherman had to deal with, Billy Goat Hill and other ones, in order to get to Missionary Ridge. It's good to make fun of Sherman for attacking the wrong hill on November 24th, 1863. But I mean, imagine somebody pointing toward 10 hills and say, attack that one. These photos give us an idea of how confusing it must have been for Sherman and his men there. Here's a photo taken from Missionary Ridge looking back toward Orchard Knob. This is a George Barnard print, and yet it just shows such incredible detail here that my friend Jim Ogden actually suggests that some of these lines here do appear to be long lines of troops. I don't know who they are, what they're doing there, but it's really, I keep looking at it year after year and thinking the breaks in them, they don't look like fences. They seem to be irregular sort of soldiers there. If so, these are at least 2 brigades lined up off in the distance. Pretty cool stuff. My favorite Chattanooga picture by far, though, is this one. This is General Joseph Hooker. I don't dislike Hooker like a lot of people do, but you're entitled to, of course. You've got Dan Butterfield, who I do sort of dislike there. Actually, I think that's Butterfield, and this is somebody else. I could be wrong, but you can see Lookout Mountain off in the distance there. I still, one of my proudest moments is to get a pretty diehard Southerner, a guy from Vicksburg, Mississippi, because he was the tallest to play General Joe Hooker in the same shadow of Lookout Mountain. Jim Ogden took us here one day, and we got a pretty close lineup, at least, of this famous photograph there. Probably the most famous photo taken in Chattanooga has to be this one. You can see U.S. Grant there off on the left, humble Grant, right? Looking like a private over here, chomping on his cigar, and members of his staff over here. You can see the photographic studio right behind the tree over there where they're making so many famous photographs, okay? Now, when you really start looking at this though, and by the way, you can line it up, it's right where the metal steps are. It was my camera, so I said, I'm gonna play Grant today. We couldn't get far enough back because of all the trees, but if you look at this one rock there, the Point Rock or the Roper Rock, you see it right there. You can go there, and it looks like I have a stick in my mouth, if I'm correct, 10 years ago. Now, when I look at this, first of all, there's a lot of us now realizing that these people off on the thing they're not Grant staff, at least not the ones who are named. They don't look anything like them when you blow up on it. And I've always had a problem with the cigar for a long, long time, because when I look at it, it's not going into his mouth. It's like going into his nose. Now, what you have here is U.S. Grant smoking a cigar. And I would suggest this is the only photo of the Civil War in which Grant has a cigar in his mouth. This is a blow up taken at Massaponax, Virginia, of course. Many of you recognize it. Check out his 3 stars, the only one who's going to be wearing those during the Civil War on the Union side. But because he was known for his cigars, every Grant reenactor, or portrayer, some of my friends too, have those cigars with them. You have every drawing and lithograph has Grant holding his legendary cigar. So of course it would make sense that in this famous photo, he's chomping on a cigar. But again, I just don't see it going into his mouth. I see it hanging out somewhere else. This doesn't look right to me. I'm not sure if you smoke your cigars coming out of your mouth there. Maybe it could come out of your chin, while you're at it. This is my friend Kurt Fields, by the way. So what I'm seeing is a branch, that is just behind him. And that looks like it's been interrupted by some problems with the photo, some emulsion or something like that. Now, I can't prove this, and I have a problem because in another photo taken before Grant got there, like a test shot, I can't quite find this branch. So I need to disclaim that there. I also don't know, is this an epaulet? Is this even Grant? I want it to be Grant. It should be Grant, but it's not his staff. I can't tell just from this that that's him. He's got a Grant look, but that's all I know. And by the way, so you have Grant here. If you look up here, you can see some of the famous rocks. You might be able to check the Umbrella Rock off in the distance. That's this one. You've seen it before. Looks like a photographer's tent there at that point. And here it is from the other side. Numerous photos taken in this very area. And you can, if you get permission, and I only got permission once, and they really don't let people out there anymore because it is dangerous. And you can sit in the exact same spot. Man, that rock has not changed over the years, because rocks do take a long time to change. All the photos taken up there are usually done by a guy named Royan Lynn, and other people. And here he is. This is his Lookout Mountain studio, courtesy of my friend Bob Zeller's book, The Blue and Gray and Black and White. You can see the famous photos he's trying to sell and show you how cool you can be if you get your photo taken on Point Lookout as well. Now, in order to get up there, you're going to have to climb some pretty rickety ladders. Excuse me. That these last 32 minutes were all one sentence, so it parches me a little bit. You know, look at these sort of ladders. Do you see how there's like holes in the rung? Like, how is this guy going to get from here to here? Exactly. Like, this is just nuts. And what you start to find when you blow up on Civil War photos is that Civil War people are sort of nuts in what they did. I mean, again, how is he supposed to climb this thing? By the way, this particular ladder supposedly was made into a cradle that is in the collections of the National Park Service at the Chickamauga-Chattanooga National Military Park, if I'm correct. So eventually, even if they get up there, you're talking about something pretty dangerous. Here's this rock from another angle. You know, it's called Roper Rock. Many people think that Roper was, being photographed, but in fact, Roper, who's misidentified in this incredible Frank Leslie's image, is actually the photographer. He is setting people up. You would think he's saying, get back a little further. Well, while he's staging them with his camera on a lower point, he's photographing them. He falls to his death, a Pennsylvania soldier, as far as I remember. And actually, they put it into Frank Leslie's, and that rock bears his name to this day, where the metal steps are. And like I said, being in the Civil War is dangerous. I mean, look at this. Here's some of those gunboats at Shiloh, and you're going to step off of that. A lot of Americans couldn't swim. You're carrying a heavy pack, and you're going to walk on something 6 inches wide and cross this thing, and you might fall to your death. But this is apparently common during the Civil War, the little plank that you're supposed to walk across just to get over to land. I mean, look, there's one over there. Look at these guys up to their axles almost in the water. I mean, where's OSHA? What is going on here back in the Civil War? And people love to take risks for the camera. Here's a photo taken of High Bridge, I believe in Virginia. And, it's called High Bridge for a reason. And these people that you can see as little specks there have no hope of ever being identified by the people who see the pictures. But nonetheless, because we can zoom in on them now, look at these guys standing on the temporary railing up there. This guy just holding by one hand. This guy holding on to some rickety things up there. They did it over and over again. Pose for the photo on the bridge. Maybe you could say life is cheap because they are attacking the stockade Redan at Vicksburg, or they're assaulting Fort Wagner in South Carolina. So taking other risks was no big deal, but man, did they like to take them up on Lookout Mountain. Just about 10, 15 steps away from the Umbrella Rock is, of course, Point Lookout, or the Point Rock, as some people call it. And here, these men in Kentucky who supposedly raised the flag on Lookout Mountain that everybody could see after the Battle of the Clouds was over, a battle above the clouds was over, they go right up to the edge over there. Now, I have been there before, and I just marvel at these people putting their legs out on the side, standing on the lower slopes. I mean, when I went, this is as close as I wanted to get, okay? And that's me on the left. I'm not even on the right. I'm not only not past here, I am not on these lower slopes here. Why? Because if you fall off of there, you are going to die. This is not like there's some sort of a ledge below you that it just looks like you're going to die. You have no hope, no hospitalization. You are going to die. And that makes you look at these people in a slightly different lens when you start looking at these photographs here. I mean, look at this guy. Do you know how slippery Civil War shoes can be? And this guy's on the edge with somebody just sort of holding onto his shoulder. That's not good enough. Let's get down to these lower areas here. But the biggest loser of the Civil War, I mean, can you imagine being this guy's mom or something, and you see this picture? He's not only on the lowest spot, but he dangles a leg down there. I mean, this is dangerous stuff. Look at this. I mean, a brisk wind comes along, soldiers go flying off Lookout Mountain, and it could be the end for you. All right. So, photographers eventually followed the action here at Knoxville, Tennessee. You are having during the Battle of Chattanooga, you could say, you have James Longstreet's force going on and trying to capture Knoxville. That does not go well. The Confederates are going to have a rough winter in that area. Read E. Porter Alexander's Fighting for the Confederacy. You should read that no matter what, by the way, the best Confederate memoir of the entire Civil War, if you ask me. And he talks about how rough some of this stuff was in that Tennessee winter there. And they recorded a very famous photo taken here at Strawberry Plains near Knoxville. I have talked to people from Knoxville. They know just where this is today. And you can see the photographer, a different photographer, getting ready to take a portrait of a soldier. One day, I'd like to find this photo. I've never seen the photo he was taking unless they're just posing. We also have even different photos. I mean, is there anything in the Civil War that was major that's more obscure than the Red River campaign? We have photos of the incredibly huge dam that the Union had to make just to get their boats actually out of the Red River when they did their retrograde movement. And of course, photographers were all too happy to accompany and go in the wake of William Tecumseh Sherman after the battles of Chattanooga, after that winter, and the Union starts moving toward Atlanta. I think you know most of these actions already. Count them: Resaca, New Hope Church, Pickett's Mill, Kennesaw Mountain, and so on. We have some pictures of a lot of these places. They're hard to line up today because unfortunately most of the Atlanta campaign is gone to us today. But that doesn't mean it's all gone. You can still have a good experience, such as here at the Battle of Resaca. You also have some photos taken at the Battle of Peachtree Creek. We have Kennesaw Mountain, both from below and from above, with the impressive fortifications now that it's 1864. This is the real deal, revetments and everything. Great photo from Kennesaw Mountain in 1864 or 66. I say that because the photographer took photos in 1864 and then realized he had some holes in his coverage, George Barnard, and went back in 66 and got additional photos there. While this is going on, that summer, at least of 1864, you have, the Union trying to capture one of the last ports along the Confederate coast. Of course, this is Damn the Torpedoes, if he ever said it, and the Battle of Fort Morgan and the Battle of Mobile Bay. Fascinating to read about. I love that book, A West Wind Flood Tide, to give you a concise version of what's going on there. And we have Civil War photos of Fort Morgan, which is a great site to visit down at Mobile. Mobile is a cool place, and where the American Battlefield Trust is holding its Teacher Institute in July, and soon we'll open registration for that event. Of course, eventually the Union will get to Atlanta, and the Union photographers go crazy. And I can't even begin to show you all the pictures taken at what we call Fort K, around Fort Z, but mostly here at Fort X. Just know that you can take these photos and you can put them together. These are some of the same cannons looking in opposite directions. And you can see these trees over here taken from other directions as well. One of those photos, this is what it looks like now. So it's really hard to line it up. A whole bunch of the other photos are actually taken on the campus of Georgia Tech, as I think a lot of you know, including these. These photos are all taken right next to a building on the Georgia Tech campus. And right next to that, you can see it right here, the famous Ponder House. There's several photos of this house. The house is long gone, heavily damaged in the battles around Atlanta here. And, I wish this tree was still here because you can see it from almost every direction. As we look at it, you can start to then not only look out toward what is now the Georgia Tech campus, but realize that this gun is also this gun. So now we can see more of the battlefield. In this fashion, I have connected some 40 photos together, and I've digitally reconstructed north and west of Atlanta. I haven't released that work yet, but someday I will. And I'll look forward to hitting you with some of my surprises and discoveries. Some of those things, I said that was the same gun. Some of you might be skeptical. Well, you can look at the floorboards and see the distinctive pieces there. So just so you know, it doesn't come out of nowhere. And I've put together, like I said, dozens of photos in order to prove a bunch of things. Here's a photo taken from Fort X, looking out toward the Ponder House. You can see in the distance, the house was right out there. There's a few people who can take you around the campus and show you some of this stuff. Of course, after the battles of Atlanta, the Union is going to march to the sea. And the last battle associated with that will be the Battle of Fort McAllister, famous because the Confederates put landmines on the approach. Some of the Union soldiers, I think Illinois soldiers, are going to take the beach and avoid those landmines. And look at this. You can see what very well might be the footprints of the attackers in this incredible photo. This series is notable for a couple of reasons, not only because there's some 35 photos taken at Fort McAllister at the end of the March to the Sea, but you also just have an incredible feature that I'm going to show you here with an Atlanta picture. Many of you have seen this photo of I think it's the rolling mill outside Atlanta, where you can see what's been burned and what remains. So look at this photo, but now look at this stunning version of it. See the difference? Look at the clouds. You haven't seen clouds in any of the photos I've shown yet because the blue spectrum of Civil War photography really didn't allow for it. You want to see clouds, you have to print the photo and then reprint the photo using a burning and dodging technique to burn those clouds onto that plate. Okay, so some of these artists actually considered it an artwork. And if you look around hard enough, you can see some of the same clouds on different photos taken on different days and weeks of the Civil War. Pretty cool. And here is one of those versions of a Fort McAllister one. This one I could swear is actually on a glass plate too. So once in a while, clouds actually can show up. At Fort McAllister too, you have cool photos that you can line up. This one's not lined up there, but some of these cool Georgia Coast Heritage Society sets up and lets you, live in certain ways and understand the Civil War better. Of course, Savannah was a popular subject with dozens of photos taken there. Many of you have probably visited this fountain before. Beautiful city, Savannah, and I hope you'll go. This is at Forsyth Park, where you have busts to Lafayette McLaws and Colonel Bartow, who died at First Manassas. You've got E.P. Alexander's house and all sorts of other people's houses whose names are escaping me now. Alexander Lawton is who I was going for. Now, of course, while Sherman marches to the sea, John Bell Hood has another idea. I'm going to go ahead and move up past Allatoona. I'm going to make my way into Tennessee real quick. Unfortunately for him, it wasn't. And maybe I can get to Nashville before the Union can reinforce the 8,000 soldiers they have there. They only had 8,000 at one point there. Of course, the photographers took photos at Allatoona Pass, and then they're going to eventually, long after the Civil War, record photos at Franklin. I think you know what happens. The Southerners miss an opportunity at the Battle of Spring Hill that results in the terrible Battle of Franklin, which battlefield is actually being reclamated today, quarter acre by quarter acre, by the American Battlefield Trust, the Battle of Franklin Trust, and the great city of Franklin there. Here's one of the earlier photos taken there in the 1880s showing the Carter Cotton Gin. They found the foundation of it, and you can see the foundation now above ground. Eventually, there's going to be a battle at Nashville outside of it, but most of the photos are taken in and around the big, impressive state capitol, including photos taken out toward the battlefield, some of which were actually taken supposedly during the battle. They're seeing battle smoke, they're hearing the booming of cannon, but they're safely miles away from the fighting at this point. Those two photos go together to form a panorama. Again, this happens time and again. And every year or two, someone discovers a new panorama. We knew the photos, but didn't know they fit together. You all can do some of this work here. You all can go and look for these photos. You can zoom into these photos and make discoveries of your own. These things are not limited to people like me. Anybody with an interest in history can download these photographs, see cool things, and maybe make some discoveries. Here are some of the soldiers who were lucky enough not to go forward with George Thomas's substantial force on December 15th and 16th at the Battle of Nashville. We have photos of their lines, and you can zoom in on them and see all sorts of great details there. Look at this. Here's some of the soldiers, again, lucky enough to be manning the lines outside of Nashville. You can see these are well-fortified lines. You can see the Union. It looks pretty shabby, but that is much better than what the freezing Confederates had on the opposing side. So, of course, one of the more neglected parts of the Civil War is what after the March to the Sea. Of course, this is when William Tecumseh Sherman does something, in many people's opinion, even harder, when he's going to strike out through the Carolinas. And that's when Joseph Johnston said, there's never been an army like this in the history of the world, that he could move at his regular pace, cross the Carolina swamps. Of course, Columbia gets burned. It seems like both sides were involved in this, much like the burning of Richmond. It seems like the Confederates set some of the fire. Union, helped, but maybe not enough. So Columbia burns, and we have 8 photos taken of the remnants. Of course, that's going to eventually result into a Union movement into North Carolina, the Battle of Aversboro, and then this battle at Bentonville, where we have no wartime photos, but where the trust is slowly putting together 1 acre at a time. A heck of a battlefield. And before long, I think you're going to see some good opportunities for those trust members who get emails from us and letters. You'll have an opportunity to help with a little bit more of Bentonville before long. Largest battle ever fought in North Carolina. Of course, after Appomattox, I think the largest surrender of the Civil War, maybe not the most consequential, but the largest one by far, was negotiated here at Bennett's Place. That's a great state historic site now, and they have a building just like it that they brought to the exact same spot. You can get a great feeling when you go there. Of course, after the Civil War in the West, and again, the West somehow, if you go south and east of Petersburg, Virginia, you're in the West. I think you have to explain these things to your non-Civil War friends. But the armies east and in some cases west are going to march in the Grand Review in Washington, D.C. Ooh, and we're getting close enough to the end, and this is happy hour, so I've saved my wine till right now. Now I'm really going to get loose. Maybe it'll slow me down a little bit. So for 2 days in May of 1865, you're going to have the Union armies parading down Pennsylvania Avenue. Or up Pennsylvania Avenue toward a reviewing stand. You can see the blur of troops going by the reviewing stand. You can see people watching. Could you imagine reading about these storied units? There's the Orphan Brigade. That's the 21st, New York. Could you imagine actually watching these troops actually go by, the ones you've read about all this time? Pretty incredible moment it must have been. Here's Winfield Scott Hancock just watching the festivities, not festivities, watching the parade at this point. And in this unbelievable photo, which nobody seemed to talk about until I looked at the other side of the negative. They always show the one side, but in this one, it's a clearer version. And you can see on Grant's staff, the Seneca Indian, Colonel Eli Parker right there. You can see U.S. Grant looking right at the camera. Next to him in profile, you can just barely catch Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War. You can see President Andrew Johnson. Again, this is May of 65. You can see General Wesley Merritt, George Gordon Meade, the spectacle, looking right toward the camera. This is Gideon Welles, the Naval Secretary. This is William Tecumseh Sherman whispering or talking to someone next to him in Montgomery Meigs. In other words, show me another photo in history where the President of the United States, his General-in-Chief, his Secretary of War and Navy, and the principal commanders of his armies, in this case, Sherman and Meade, and the quartermaster are all in one photo. And I didn't discover this until 2015. After knowing all these people were on the platform, after examining them before, I only say this because these discoveries are open to all y'all. Of course, one of the later acts in the drama, too, is the re-raising of the flag at Fort Sumter, where you can see these flags just draping these ships here. Modern technology allowed my friend John Richter to clean that up. Look how much nicer we can even do compared to the incredible Civil War photos. But of course, the main event is to raise the flag 4 years after it was taken down at Fort Sumter. Henry Ward Beecher is there. You see him giving a speech, but I zoomed in on him not for that reason, but to focus in on him. To the lower left, that's Major, now General Robert Anderson, not in the best of health, but made the trip. And there he is chilling out, sort of sitting on that corner of the stage 4 years after he had evacuated the place. It's a great series. You can see all sorts of cool things when you zoom in on those photos. The last acts in the drama, depending on what you'll want to, count. Of course, after Bennett Place, you have other Confederate surrenders at Galveston, Texas. You have them at Citronelle, Alabama, and elsewhere. But the war had already effectively ended at Appomattox, effectively, even if not literally. You've got the CSS Shenandoah still roaming around out there. You've got Confederate President Jefferson Davis captured on May 10th in Irvinville, Georgia here. And then what are we left with? After the parades, after the captures, after the surrenders, you have the dead, 620,000. Some people love throwing out what I like to call an Adams County, Pennsylvania snow forecast, 650 to 850,000 dead. That is a completely unhelpful number, by the way. And I still use 620 because I don't even bother with such a big number. The big number admittedly also includes civilians and people that died long after the Civil War. So I still say 620, that is plenty of dead, and they are all over the place. And eventually, as time would go on, of course, people would go and visit these cemeteries to see what these people did in the past. And the veterans themselves would form groups. They would found newspapers. They would march in parades. They would write books, and they would gather together. And eventually, they would gather on battlefields and erect monuments on those battlefields. And these veterans, East and West, are going to engage in these things. And you can, of course, go back to this one of the earlier monuments of the Civil War. And by the way, these 100-pounder parrot shells were live until the 1940s when the park took over. Those big ones can disintegrate you. They don't have to hit you. You don't even have to be hit by them to be disintegrated. And eventually the veterans are going to age, of course, go to some final reunions, and then that generation is simply gone. Before they died, some veterans, 1,800 of them at Gettysburg, got to see color movie cameras. There were planes flying overhead. There were tanks all around there. They'd already seen a world war. And to this end, I like to use this to talk about how the Civil War just wasn't that long ago. Civil War soldiers saw TV. Civil War veterans saw color movies. They saw some of the things. I have met more than 100 people that have shaken the hands of Civil War veterans. I only missed the last one by 11 years. It wasn't that long ago. I have been to a full 1/5 of all the Gettysburg battle anniversaries in my life. And before I die, maybe I'll have been to 1/3 of them. This is my job working at the trust, is to drag the past forward so it doesn't seem, and indeed it wasn't all that long ago. Of course, with the veterans gone and with, World War II, Korea and Vietnam, people had tired of war and battlefields got paved over during that time. But as many of you know, in the late 1980s, up comes the 125th anniversary. Then you have the movie Glory. Then you have the Ken Burns series. You've got the Gettysburg movie. You've got the Killer Angels. You've got all these things. And the modern battlefield preservation movement is born at that time. That's when the Civil War Trust is born. That's when the Save Historic Antietam Foundation is formed. And Franklin Trust and others will come along. Let's see. And give me a sec. I lost my thing for a bit. And so what we're left with is many things. We have their accounts, we have the battlefields themselves, and we have the photos. So we can stare into their eyes and actually look at them. And it seems like somebody's drawn on my screen at this point, which is pretty interesting. But here they are, looking back toward the camera, the people who had actually lived through the Civil War, most of them civilians, some soldiers, some working for the government at that point. And my grandest lesson from the Civil War is simple. We are just like they were. Sure, our lives are different. They were a little hardier. We know some things that they don't. But when you read their writings, you see they cared about the same things that we do. And I think that's a better way to understand things a little bit. We like to paint people with a simple brush. It's one thing or the other. And like us today, it's not that simple. Last thing I want to say is, of course, the Trust is very active, saving battlefields in the West. If you're not a member of the Trust, I hope you'll sign up for our emails, get to know us a little bit better. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where we release a whole lot of videos, which keeps me busy, to be sure. Look at the difference it could make at one place here, Perryville, Kentucky, where only this brown swath was saved long ago, and the Trust and its members have been able to since preserve everything in blue, plus the things in yellow, with more to come. We've almost preserved that entire battlefield. That's just one example. So thank you, everybody, for your attention, for listening at this History Happy Hour. I'm going to have a sip of wine here, and I'll be glad to get to some of your questions. Okay. Thank you, Uli. I appreciate that. Kind comment. The best Confederate memoir, Fighting for the Confederacy, is the question. Thank you, Kit Walsh asked. It's called Fighting for the Confederacy by E.P. Alexander. And can you take a tour by boat at Vicksburg? Yes, you can. Is it free? No, it is not. It's best to catch a group tour on the Mississippi in order to do that. Good question. Good. Let's see, Stuart. I don't think you have a question there, but very cool as well. Thanks again, Uli. Thank you, Natalie B. Glad you enjoyed. Thank you, Marty. I'm seeing lots of accolades, which I could do all night, but any other questions, put them into the chat. I'm not sure if Kelly has anything to add at this point.
Well, thank you, Gary. And if we don't have any other questions.
There's actually one more.
One just come in.
Let me hit Roy Meads real quick. E.P. Alexander did write another book. He asked me whether E.P. Alexander wrote another one. So you have one called Military Memoirs of a Confederate. And that one was meant for public consumption. The good thing about Fighting for the Confederacy is he wrote it for his family. He never expected it to see the light of day. And indeed, it didn't until the 1980s when Garry Gallagher edited that version. In other words, he talks trash about people. He does the incredible. He says something bad about Robert E. Lee. Plenty of them, actually. He never expected it to go public, and it didn't until 70 years after he had died. So that's what I would really suggest at that point. Thanks, Sharon, for the kind words. Thank you, Civil War Loser. I still want to know who you are, because I think I know you, but I don't know you by that name. The last capitulation in Texas, that one I showed you, I think was Citronelle, Alabama. I'm not aware of a photo of the capitulation in Galveston. What is the Western Theater? Hello, Pat Tremble, by the way. What are we working on in the West right now? Well, let me think. We don't have anything going on at Shiloh. We're still, I think, raising some money for Stones River. You know what? I'm going to cheat. because I am all photoed out at this point. So give me a quick second here and I'll tell you exactly what we're working on in the Western Theater. We've got, sorry, everybody, 4 sacred battlefields. God, it looks like I have to actually click on some of these. Oh yeah, Champion Hill, Corinth, Lookout Mountain, and Port Hudson is our biggest version here that's going on. Let me see if there's one more I want to reference before I move on to another one here. No, I'm going to stop with that one because that's 4 is plenty, I guess. Were there any women photographies to the best of your knowledge? Yes, Nancy, there were women photographers, but I don't know of a main photographer. There were a couple of photographic assistants, and we're talking about recording 1, 2, 3 documentary photos. Now, keep in mind, I'm talking about documentary photos, not so much the ones in studios. I'm sure there are numerous photos executed by women during the Civil War in studios, but we don't see as many of those. Thank you, Becky. Thank you to Matt's. Southern photos not as common as the war continued due to expense. Yes, I'm not sure if you caught that part, but they ran out of chemicals. And if you only have a little bit of chemistry, you're going to sell portraits with it. And then, of course, because in every way the South lacked money, so nothing is going to sell it as well. And photos are a luxury. Did Gardner ever admit to staging photos? No, Todd. I think, what we consider staging, we take a photograph and, you change the angle. Sometimes you might throw a brick in there to make it look a little bit more destroyed. What exactly is staging a photo? Yes, Gardner's team is known to have moved 1 corpse in the entire Civil War. 1. Because he moved 1, it doesn't mean they moved 50. It doesn't mean every corpse was moved or anything like that. 1. So does putting a shell mean a manipulation? What about getting people to pose? Oh, he wasn't standing like that. Put his hand on his hip now. Is that staging a photo? I'm not sure if Gardner felt he was doing anything wrong. That is, unless he miscaptioned on purpose, which I think he did, and no, he never admitted it. Sophia, thanks. Glad you enjoyed. Suggested photographer from the South. You mentioned there are a few. The main Southern photographers, George Cook, look for him in Charleston. Osborne and Dern Beck, look for them in Charleston as well. Rees, a guy named Rees in Richmond, who was more of a portrait artist, but he recorded the only photos of Richmond during the Civil War before the Union came in 1865. So I'd look at them. If you want to learn about this, try to find a copy of the Blue and Gray and Black and White. It's the whole story of Civil War photography. It's the best single volume that'll tell you about photography and photographers. Now, if you really want to understand documentary photography, check out William Frazanito's work, his 4 Gettysburg books, plus his Antietam book and his Grant and Lee book. I love that all these questions came in at the end. So sorry, Kelly, I do have to go pretty soon, but has digital manipulation been used to recreate, improve the definition in the plates of that era? How widely is that being attempted? Yes, Michael, all of us are doing that to some extent. Just the way that I zoomed into photos is a complete digital manipulation by scanning it at high resolution and zooming in to see something to help identify the 3 key ones: when it was taken, where it was taken, by whom it was taken. Then suddenly that photo becomes a primary document instead of some sort of a graphic medium that can help to highlight other text. So it's absolutely being attempted. Some people take it way too far and see things that aren't there, but all of us who study Civil War photographs are doing that. You can turn things into negatives, you can change the colors, you can play with them and zoom in. We're all doing it. And thanks, Pat. That was Citronelle that I showed. Any photos of Donaldson? No wartime photos of Fort Donaldson. Steck. Sorry. And then let me move to the last questions that I might see at the end. Gary and Kelly, thank you so much for putting this on. I volunteer at New England Civil War Museum in Rockville, Connecticut. Go Connecticut. And I'm happy to have the opportunities. Thank you. How have these photos helped you in your effort to preserve the battlefields? Well, I can tell you a few things. The Trust's efforts to restore battlefields falls into my shop. It might not seem like an education thing, but it is. And we regularly use photos to know what something looked like. Take Lee's headquarters at Gettysburg. We were able to put the same types of fences there because you can see them in the photos. We were able to determine which stones are which within that building, okay? Also, it definitely helps us, just like it helped the Eastern Theater to sell. It helps the Trust if we're saving a piece of land that was photographed during the Civil War. More of our members and donors find it more compelling when they can visualize it. So I also think that photos play a key role in people being able to sympathize with that this is real, this happened, these people are more like me. So I could go on all night about how photos help us in our efforts. I really do. Let's see how to download the picture from the Library of Congress. Oh, Sarah is Civil War loser. Good, I've learned now. Thank you for that. Glad you like Jeremy. Who employed the photographers? This is the last question I will take. Let's see, because it looks like we have some football news coming up too, but who employed the photographers? Very few of them were employed by anybody but themselves. So most of these photographers are working on spec. There's a few exceptions. A guy named Andrew Russell and sometimes Alexander Gardner, who were employed to record engineering feats and to copy maps. There were Union and Confederate photographers actually employed by the government to copy maps. There was no Xerox. You had to take a photo of it and print it again in order to do it, sometimes in pieces only to tape them together. So most of these people were having to make a business of it. And that's why there were millions of portraits and only about 10,000 documentary photos taken. Let's see. Oh, okay. Pat has some good news about Coach Dooley and everything like that. I won't read that for everybody. Thank you, Michael. I'm going to stop talking now. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'll turn it back to Kelly.
Well, thank you, Gary, so much. And we did record this. I know it went by really quickly, so we will have this available on our YouTube channel before too long, and you can watch again. And as always, if you want to find out more about the museum or our programs, you can go to acwm.org. So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Gary. That was a great presentation. And everyone have a good rest of the night.